I'm sorry. I think I'm short. The frail old man's voice cracked under the harsh lights of a grocery store. Everyone looked away, except one woman. When Clara Monroe stepped forward with her last $42, she thought she was helping a stranger. She had no idea she was setting off a chain of events that would change the destiny of an entire city. What began as one quiet act of kindness would soon thrust her into a battle against corruption, betrayal, and a fight for the soul of her community. Stay until the end, because the final twist will leave you breathless. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. Please, just give me a moment. I know I have it somewhere. The old man's voice cracked under the sterile fluorescent lights of Miller's Market, barely louder than a whisper, yet sharp enough to slice through the numbing hum of the checkout line. Clara Monroe froze, her fingers wrapped loosely around the handle of her shopping basket. She had been staring absently at a tabloid headline about celebrity divorces, the kind of nonsense that usually offered easy distraction from her heavy life. But this snapped her awake. At register 3, a frail man with trembling hands was fumbling through his pockets. Loose coins clinked against the counter, scattering like silver raindrops. His brown leather wallet, cracked and worn thin, hung limply from his shaking grip. The cashier, a girl no older than 20, sighed heavily and crossed her arms. "Sir, if you don't have enough—" "I do," the old man interrupted, voice laced with panic. His pale cheeks flushed with shame. He turned out another pocket. Only lint and an expired bus pass spilled out. Behind him, shoppers shifted impatiently. One woman in yoga pants huffed audibly, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against her phone. A man in a tailored suit muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Unbelievable," holding up the line for $12 worth of junk. The tension coiled tighter with every passing second. Clara's chest tightened. She recognized that look in the old man's eyes, the hollow fear of being seen, of being judged. It was the same look she used to see in her mother's face at the pharmacy when insurance wouldn't cover her medicine. It was a kind of helplessness you never really forgot. She looked down at her own basket, a loaf of store-brand bread, a jar of peanut butter, a bag of frozen peas. Just enough for the week, if she stretched it thin. The old man's voice trembled again. "I thought I had it. I'm sorry." And that was it. Clara set her basket down with a quiet thud and stepped forward. "I've got it," she said, louder than she intended. Every head turned. Even the cashier blinked, startled. The old man's watery blue eyes widened in disbelief. No, miss, I couldn't possibly." "It's okay," Clara said, gently but firmly. She reached into the pocket of her faded denim jacket and pulled out her wallet, the very one that had exactly $47.26 tucked away in it, earmarked for groceries, gas, and maybe, if she was lucky, a second-hand book at the thrift store to keep her company on long nights. Without hesitation, she peeled off 2 crumpled 20s and a handful of loose ones and pushed them toward the cashier. "Please," she said, "let's not make him stand here another second." The girl behind the counter hesitated, glanced at the growing line, and then rang it up. The register beeped. The plastic bags rustled. Clara smiled at the old man, warm and simple. No questions, no conditions, no fanfare. But when she turned to gather her small basket again, the old man was gone. No goodbye, no thank you beyond the startled murmur he'd managed at the counter. Just gone. Like a phantom fading into the noise of the world. The walk home from Miller's Market was short, but that evening it felt unusually long. The September air had a bite to it, crisp against Clara's worn-out sneakers. Leaves skittered across the cracked sidewalks like tiny dancers. Somewhere a dog barked, and the distant clang of a closing diner door echoed down the block. Clara hugged her lightweight jacket tighter around her. The food she bought barely weighed anything in her arms, yet her heart felt strangely full. Not heavy, full. She smiled to herself, remembering the old man's stunned expression, the way his mouth had fallen open in disbelief. Maybe it was silly, but that moment, the way kindness could catch someone so completely off guard, was more nourishing than anything she could have carried home in a bag. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a tired brick building. that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and mildew. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her knees protesting, and unlocked the door with a metallic click. Inside, the little space greeted her like an old friend. A second-hand couch with springs that poked her back. A coffee table stacked with library books. A cracked window pane taped hastily at the edges. None of it was glamorous, but it was hers. Clara dropped her groceries on the kitchen counter, shoved aside an unopened electric bill, and flopped onto the couch with a sigh. Her phone, ancient and barely holding a charge, buzzed weakly. She picked it up. 4 new notifications. Rent payment due. Final notice. Electric company, shut off, scheduled in 3 days. Student loan default warning. Job alert, no new listings in your area. Clara stared at the screen until the words blurred. She wasn't naive, she knew how close she was living to the edge, like walking a tightrope over open air. One unexpected bill, one bad week, and she'd lose everything she'd scraped together after her mother's death 2 years ago. Still, she didn't regret paying for that man's groceries, not even for a second. If you're only kind when it's easy, her mother used to say, then it's not really kindness at all. Clara turned off the phone, letting darkness fill the room. Outside, the city hummed, unaware, indifferent. But somewhere out there, an old man had groceries tonight because a stranger decided not to look away. She fell asleep smiling, her heart quieter than it had been in months. Yet far beyond her tiny world, something had already begun to move. The wheels of fate, invisible but unstoppable, were turning. Because Clara Monroe had just unknowingly changed the course of not just one life, but an entire city. And by the time she woke up tomorrow morning, her own life would never be the same again. Bam, bam. The pounding shook the thin apartment door with such force that Clara jolted upright on the couch, heart hammering in her chest. It was still dark, the clock on the wall blinking 5:47 a.m. in harsh red digits. For a disoriented second, she wondered if she'd dreamed it. Bam, bam. No, it was real. Someone was outside. Clara scrambled up, feet tangling in the old knitted throw blanket she had pulled over herself. She stumbled toward the door, instinctively checking the peephole. 2 men in sharp black suits stood rigidly in the dim hallway, their faces half-shadowed. A sleek black sedan idled at the curb beyond the stairwell window, headlights slicing through the morning fog. Panic prickled down Clara's spine. Had she forgotten to pay something? Had the landlord sent, what? Debt collectors? Police? She swallowed hard, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. Who is it? She called, her voice a shaky whisper. One of the men stepped closer, raising a small badge to eye level. Miss Clara Monroe? Yes? Mayor Richard Carver requests your presence, immediately. The words hit her like cold water. The mayor? The mayor of Hawthorne City? Before Clara could even form a coherent thought, the second man added smoothly, Please, Miss Monroe, it's urgent, and it's a good thing. A good thing. She blinked, utterly baffled. In her entire life, no one wearing suits and driving black sedans had ever shown up at her door to deliver anything good. Within minutes, Clara found herself seated in the back seat of the black sedan, clutching her faded denim jacket tightly around her as the city blurred past the windows. The 2 men said little, just quiet, professional murmurs into earpieces she couldn't quite hear. Her mind raced. Was this about the old man? Had something happened to him? Was he okay? Why the mayor? Why the urgency? The questions circled endlessly, feeding her anxiety until her stomach twisted into knots. As the car turned a corner, Clara caught movement out of the corner of her eye. On a street corner, clustered around a newsstand, a small crowd had gathered. People leaned in, pointing at something, some front page plastered in bold black ink. At first, she thought little of it, until she saw her own face staring back at her from the glossy print. Clara gasped aloud. Stop the car, she blurted, but the driver merely pressed forward. You'll understand soon, Miss Monroe, one of the men said kindly, without turning around. The headline, the few words she managed to glimpse, burned themselves into her mind. Simple act of kindness sparks unthinkable chain of events. Meet Clara Monroe. Her hands trembled. What on earth was happening? The car pulled up to the grand steps of City Hall, a massive stone building that Clara had only ever seen from the outside. It looked even more imposing in the pale morning light, the American flag fluttering solemnly above its columns. As she stepped out, blinking against the rising sun, A brisk woman in a navy blue skirt suit greeted her at the door. "Miss Monroe, this way, please. The mayor is waiting." Clara stumbled after her, the worn soles of her sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished marble floors. They passed through long hallways adorned with historic photographs, portraits of governors, faded black and white shots of a younger, smaller Hawthorne city. And at the end of it all, beyond a pair of massive double doors, stood Mayor Richard Carver. He was a barrel-chested man in his early 60s, with silver hair and eyes like sharp steel. But when he saw Clara, he smiled, a wide, genuine smile that immediately disarmed some of her terror. "Miss Monroe," he said warmly, striding toward her and clasping both her hands between his. "You have no idea what you've done." Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She felt completely lost, a tiny ship in a roiling sea of confusion. Mayor Carver chuckled softly at her bewildered expression. "Please sit, let me explain." The mayor motioned toward a long oak conference table. At the center sat a leather portfolio, a crisp envelope, and a small stack of photographs. "Yesterday afternoon," Carver began, his voice rich and deliberate, "you paid for an elderly man's groceries at Miller's Market, correct?" Clara nodded, her throat too dry to speak. "And you did so," he continued, eyes twinkling slightly, "without knowing who he was." She blinked. "He was just an old man who needed help," she finally managed to whisper. The mayor beamed as if she had passed some great impossible test. "That man," he said, tapping the photographs, "was William Ellis." The name meant nothing to Clara. She shook her head blankly. Mayor Carver smiled wider. "Founder of the Ellis Foundation, billionaire philanthropist, reclusive, mysterious, and recently, searching." He slid one of the photographs toward her. It showed the same old man, stooped, weathered, nearly invisible in his plain jacket and sagging trousers, smiling shyly at the grocery counter. For months, Mr. Ellis had been wandering the city, in disguise, testing people, Carver said, seeing if kindness still existed when there was nothing to gain. He let that sink in. Most people, Carver said, voice tightening slightly, ignored him. Some were polite but dismissive. A few even offered help, but only after realizing who he was. He pointed at Clara now, his finger firm but reverent. "Only you treated him like a human being, without agenda, without pride, without knowing or caring who he really was." Clara sat frozen, her mind barely able to process the words. "A billionaire? Testing people? Me?" The mayor leaned closer, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Before he left the store yesterday, Mr. Ellis made one final request to the city council, a very specific, very personal one." He slid the envelope across the table toward her. He wanted to ensure that the one person who still believed in simple goodness would be given the chance to change the world in an even bigger way. Mayor Carver's smile faded into something almost solemn. "Miss Monroe," he said, "you're about to be given a gift very few people in history have ever received." Clara stared at the envelope, hands trembling slightly. What is it?" she whispered. Carver tapped the envelope once. "Open it." Inside was a letter, written in flowing, elegant script. "Dear Clara, you gave without expecting to receive. You saw a man, not a transaction. Because of you, hope is restored. Enclosed, you will find the means to pursue your dreams, lift others, and build a life beyond survival. Use it wisely. Use it bravely. William Ellis." Beneath the letter was a crisp check, bearing more zeros than Clara had ever seen in her life. $1,000, and attached, stapled neatly to the back, were scholarship certificates to the top 3 universities in the state. Clara's vision blurred with tears. The room, the mayor, the suited aides, all of it dissolved into a shimmering haze. For so long she had fought to stay afloat, to survive one month to the next, scraping pennies together like armor against a world that never noticed her. And now the world had not only noticed, but celebrated the very thing she thought had made her invisible. Her kindness. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth, overcome. The mayor simply smiled, standing up and clapping her lightly on the back. "Welcome to the first day of your real life, Miss Monroe," he said. "And believe me, the city's just as lucky as you are." "Miss Monroe, can you tell us how it feels to be a hero overnight?" The reporter's microphone hovered inches from Clara's face as camera flashes exploded all around her. She blinked against the blinding light, feeling like a deer caught on a busy highway. "Hero? Overnight? What is happening?" It hadn't even been 24 hours since she paid for that old man's groceries. Now standing on the marble steps of City Hall, Clara Monroe was suddenly the city's most famous name. Across the street, huge digital billboards rolled headlines she couldn't escape. Simple woman, extraordinary heart, the face of kindness in Hawthorne City. Local grocery angel, changes billionaire's life and her own. From broke to billionaire's protege, who is Clara Monroe? Clara's hands trembled slightly as she tried to answer, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a hero, she said honestly. I just saw someone who needed help. The crowd of journalists surged forward, peppering her with more questions. Did you know who he was? What are you planning to do with the money? Will you start a charity? Write a book? Run for office? Can we follow you home for an exclusive interview? Each question felt like a hammer blow, relentless and overwhelming. Clara hugged her jacket tighter around her thin frame, heart pounding like a war drum inside her chest. She had never asked for this. She had never dreamed of fame. All she had wanted was to make sure a frightened old man didn't leave a grocery store hungry. Now, the whole city, and maybe soon the whole country, wanted a piece of her. Mayor Carver gently placed a hand on her shoulder, steering her away from the shouting reporters. Come on, Clara, he said kindly. Let's get you somewhere quieter. He led her into a side entrance of City Hall, away from the cameras and chaos, down quiet marble hallways, past statues of long-forgotten politicians, until finally they stopped in a small sitting room with velvet chairs and high arched windows. Clara sank into a chair, breathing hard. Mayor Carver crouched down so he was eye level with her. Listen, he said softly. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand what you did. It reminded people of something they'd forgotten. Clara looked up at him, confusion clouding her eyes. What's that? She whispered. The mayor smiled, a tired, knowing smile that carried the weight of too many years in public service. That there's still good in this world, he said. That kindness isn't dead. You showed everyone that one small quiet act can still shake the ground we walk on. He paused, letting the words settle between them. But it comes with a price, he added gravely. Attention, pressure. People will expect things of you now. Some will try to use you. Some will worship you. And some, he hesitated, some will resent you. Clara swallowed hard, the enormity of it hitting her all over again. I never wanted any of this, she said, her voice cracking. Carver patted her hand gently. That's exactly why you're the right person, he said. Later that afternoon, Clara slipped away from City Hall through a side door, a borrowed baseball cap pulled low over her face. She needed air. She needed to think. Walking through the city she had known her whole life, everything felt different now. Strangers smiled at her, some even called out her name. A man at a coffee cart refused her money when she tried to pay for a cup. It's on the house, Miss Monroe, he said with a grin. Thank you for reminding us what matters. Clara mumbled her thanks and hurried away, clutching the steaming paper cup like a lifeline. Everywhere she turned, her own face seemed to stare back at her from newspapers, TV screens and storefront windows, even scrolling banners on taxis. It was surreal and terrifying. Finally, she found herself standing in front of a familiar sight. Miller's Market, the grocery store where it had all begun. Through the glass windows she saw the same cashier from yesterday, now smiling brightly and wearing a huge button that read, "We believe in kindness." The same register where the old man had stood was now decorated with balloons and a cardboard cutout of a heart. Clara pressed a hand against the glass, overwhelmed by emotion. One small moment, one quiet decision, and somehow, the world had changed. But what haunted her most wasn't the fame or the attention. It was the memory of the old man's face, lined, weary, grateful, and the simple honesty of the moment they had shared. She missed that, the purity of it. Before the cameras, before the headlines, before the whole world had turned it into a spectacle. That night, back in her apartment, Clara sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at the check. $1,000. It didn't feel real. The letter from Mr. Ellis lay beside it, the words still echoing in her mind. Use it wisely, use it bravely. But how? She could finally pay off her mother's debts, finish her degree, move out of the crumbling apartment, buy a reliable car. She could breathe again without the crushing weight of fear sitting on her chest every morning. And yet, A small, insistent voice inside her whispered that it wasn't really about her, that the gift wasn't just a reward, it was a responsibility, a challenge, a call. Clara stood up, pacing the tiny living room, her bare feet brushing against the frayed carpet. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, heavier than it had been even when she had been broke. Because now, she realized, the hardest question wasn't what she would do with the money. It was who she would become because of it. As the moon rose high over Hawthorne City, casting silver light over the sleeping streets, Clara Monroe stood at her window, staring out into the vast, glittering darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, haunted, hopeful, afraid. Tomorrow, the world would expect her to be something more. Tomorrow, she would have to choose. Not just how to spend the money, but how to live the life it had suddenly bought her. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of her phone vibrating furiously across the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls. Even more messages. The news hadn't faded overnight, it had exploded. Her story was trending nationally now. TV anchors spoke her name with reverence. Online forums debated her innate goodness versus whether the world had manufactured heroes like her out of desperation. And still, somewhere underneath the whirlwind of attention, Clara felt hollow. The truth was simple. Nothing about her had changed. She was still the same woman who struggled to buy bread last week. Still the same woman who sometimes cried herself to sleep, wondering if anyone ever noticed people like her. The world had changed, but she hadn't. A text from Mayor Carver's office broke through the noise. "Please come to City Hall today. Private meeting. Important. Urgent. RC." Clara stared at it for a long time. Another meeting? What now? Warily, she pulled on her jeans and her same battered sneakers. She didn't bother with makeup. No expensive clothes, no armor. Just herself. If the world expected her to transform overnight, they were going to be disappointed. The ride to City Hall felt surreal. As she stepped out of the taxi, she spotted herself again on the giant billboard across Main Street. Clara Monroe, the heart that changed Hawthorne. She ducked her head and hurried inside. Mayor Carver was already waiting in the private conference room, but this time he wasn't smiling. His face was grim, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Across from him sat a woman Clara had never seen before, elegantly dressed, cool-eyed, carrying a leather portfolio tucked neatly under one arm. "Miss Monroe," Carver said, standing. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Clara lowered herself cautiously into the chair, every nerve on edge. "What's going on?" The mayor exchanged a glance with the woman before answering. "There's something you need to know about Mr. Ellis," he said quietly, "something he didn't tell anyone publicly." The woman leaned forward, her voice low and measured. "Mr. Ellis is dying, Miss Monroe." The words hit Clara like a punch to the chest. "What?" she breathed. "Terminal illness," the woman said. "Stage 4. He's refused treatment. Doctors estimate he has less than 3 months left." Clara's hands trembled in her lap. The image of the old man, fragile, shuffling, alone at the grocery store, flashed in her mind with brutal clarity. He hadn't just been searching for kindness. He had been searching for someone to carry something forward when he couldn't anymore. Mayor Carver continued gently. "The act of kindness you showed him meant more than you realize. He wasn't just testing humanity. He was searching for a successor." Clara blinked, stunned. Successor?" The woman nodded. "Mr. Ellis has left very specific instructions. If he found someone worthy, he would pass on his final legacy, not just the check you already received, something much, much bigger." She opened the portfolio and slid a stack of documents toward Clara. Charters, trusts, endowments. Billions of dollars earmarked for community projects, scholarships, shelters, medical research, and more. It was staggering. It was incomprehensible. And all of it was now linked to her name. Clara stared down at the papers, unable to breathe properly. I'm not qualified for this," she stammered. "I'm just a waitress, a college dropout. I don't know anything about foundations or charity boards or—" The mayor raised a hand, silencing her gently. "You know kindness," he said. "You know compassion. The rest, that can be taught. But heart, that's rare. That can't be learned." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. She shook her head in disbelief. "Why me?" she whispered. The woman across the table smiled for the first time, a small, sad smile. "Because when no one else was looking, when no one else was rewarding you, you chose to do the right thing," she said. "That's the measure of a leader. Not power, Not money. Character. For a long moment Clara sat frozen. The room seemed too large, the ceiling too high, the weight of the world too heavy for her narrow shoulders. Billions of dollars. Thousands of lives she could touch. A legacy stretching far beyond anything she could ever have imagined. And it had all started with a simple act of buying a man his groceries. Mayor Carver's voice softened. "You don't have to decide today," he said, "but there's one more thing you should know." Clara looked up, hollow with fear and awe. "Mr. Ellis has requested to meet you," he said, privately, "before it's too late." The words settled heavily between them. A private meeting, a final goodbye, a passing of the torch. Clara rose slowly, legs shaking. "Where is he?" she asked. The woman closed the portfolio gently. "Waiting," she said simply. "Not far from here, whenever you're ready." Clara hesitated only a moment longer, then nodded. She was terrified, she was overwhelmed, but she knew, deep in her soul, there was only one answer. "I'm ready," she said. And with that, Clara Monroe stepped out of the office, not as a confused broke girl anymore, but as something new, something rare. Something the world had almost forgotten still existed. The taxi pulled up in front of a quiet, ivy-draped house on the outskirts of Hawthorne City. There were no security guards, no grand estate gates, no sign that one of the wealthiest men in the country was spending his final days here. Just a modest, sun-bleached porch and a creaking swing that swayed gently in the breeze. Clara stepped out slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Breathe," she told herself. Just breathe, but nothing could steady the storm churning inside her. The door opened before she even knocked, and there he was, William Ellis, the old man from the grocery store. But now, in the clear light of day, she saw the truth written across him. The thinness of his frame, the papery quality of his skin, the way his shoulders sagged as if carrying invisible weights. Yet his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were still sharp, still full of light. "Clara," he said warmly, smiling as if she were an old friend returning home. "You came." She nodded, unable to find her voice. He beckoned her inside with a trembling hand. "Come, child. We don't have much time." The living room smelled of cedar and old books. Sunlight slanted through gauzy curtains, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floor. Photos lined the walls, dozens of them. Smiling children, newly built schools, medical clinics in far-off countries, scholarship recipients in cap and gown. His life's work, his quiet rebellion against a world that had once nearly swallowed him whole. William Ellis settled into an armchair by the window, motioning for Clara to take the seat opposite him. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, the ticking of an old clock filling the space between them. Finally, Ellis spoke, his voice rough but steady. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Clara leaned forward slightly. "Who?" she asked softly. Ellis smiled, wistful. "My daughter," he said. "Her name was Lillian. She had a heart like yours, always putting others first, always believing the world could be better." His smile faltered, the pain surfacing beneath. "She died when she was only 22, he said. "Cancer. Took her faster than we could understand." Clara's chest ached. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Ellis nodded, eyes distant. "After she died, I built my empire, but not for wealth, not for glory. I built it because," he paused, voice cracking, "because I promised her I would leave the world kinder than I found it." Tears burned at Clara's eyes. Here he was, a titan by any measure, and yet the thing that had driven him wasn't ambition or power. It was love. It was grief. It was a simple, sacred promise to a daughter he could never hold again. "When I met you in that grocery store," Ellis continued, smiling faintly, "I thought perhaps my time hadn't been wasted after all." He reached across the small table between them and clasped Clara's hands in his own. His skin was paper-thin, his grip weak, but the emotion behind it was fierce. "You saw me," he whispered. "Not a billionaire, not a charity case, just a man." Clara's throat closed with emotion. "You taught me that kindness still lives," Ellis said. "And now, Clara Monroe, I'm asking you to carry that light forward." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I will," she promised, voice trembling. "I swear I will." For a moment, they simply sat there, hands clasped, two broken souls finding comfort in shared hope. And then, Ellis chuckled, surprising her. "You know," he said, his eyes twinkling mischievously, "there's something else I need to tell you. Something no one else knows yet." Clara wiped at her tears, smiling despite herself. More surprises? She teased gently. One last, he said, leaning back with a sigh. He tapped his fingers against the armrest thoughtfully before speaking. In addition to the money, the foundation, the scholarships, there's one more gift I arranged, he said. Clara tilted her head curiously. What is it? Ellis grinned. Your mother, he said simply. Clara froze. What? She gasped. Ellis nodded. I did some digging after I left the grocery store that day. Learned about you, your struggles, your sacrifices. He smiled gently. Your mother's medical debt? Paid, her house? Saved. And her final request before she passed was to have a scholarship fund named in her honor. The Marion Monroe Scholarship Fund will help hundreds of young women chase their dreams, forever linked to the kindness you showed me. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly now. He hadn't just changed her life. He had honored the woman who had taught her everything about compassion, strength, and dignity. He had turned her pain into a permanent beacon of hope. Why? She managed to choke out between tears. Why would you do all of this? For me? Ellis smiled softly, a faraway look in his eyes. Because someone once did it for me, he said. And because if we don't lift each other up, who will? The sun dipped lower, bathing the room in warm amber light. Ellis's breathing grew shallower, his eyelids fluttering. Clara squeezed his hand gently. Rest, she whispered. I'll take it from here. A faint smile crossed his lips. Good, he murmured. Good girl. And then, like a candle flickering one last time before going out, William Ellis drifted into sleep. Clara sat with him until the stars appeared outside the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance like silent witnesses. In the quiet of that little house, a simple woman made a vow, not just to a dying man, but to the future itself. She would honor kindness. She would fight for dignity. She would carry the light forward, even when the world tried to snuff it out. And somewhere, she knew, William Ellis and Lillian were smiling down on her. Because hope, true hope, had found a new torchbearer. And her name was Clara Monroe. The funeral was small. At William Ellis's quiet request, there were no grand speeches, no televised tributes, no gold-plated plaques or marble statues, just a circle of people, a handful of old friends, foundation workers, a few scholars he had quietly sponsored over the years, and Clara Monroe. Standing near the back, hands clasped tightly in front of her, she watched as they lowered the simple pine casket into the earth under a canopy of oak trees. No paparazzi were allowed, no reporters, but Clara could feel the world pressing in anyway, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. She could feel the headlines writing themselves. Billionaire benefactor's secret heir. What will Clara Monroe do? The funeral ended. The mourners dispersed. And Clara stood alone by the grave for a long time until the sky turned violet and the cicadas began to sing. I'll make you proud, she whispered into the growing dark. I promise. But promises were easier made at gravesides. Much harder to keep in the living world. Within 48 hours, the vultures began circling. First came the lawyers, well-dressed men and women in sharp suits, each eager to help her navigate the sudden tidal wave of money and responsibility. Then the media offers, six-figure book deals, reality shows about her journey, exclusive interviews promising to tell the real story, but only if she signed away creative control. Then the business tycoons, partnerships, endorsements, all of them hungry to tether their names to her unexpected fame. Clara's email inbox, once a lonely, quiet place, now overflowed with flattery, manipulation, and thinly veiled threats. Miss Monroe, you owe it to the world to step into the spotlight. People are waiting. Don't waste this moment. Without guidance, you could squander everything Mr. Ellis built. Translation: let us control you, or we'll destroy you. Even some of her so-called friends, the few she thought she could trust, changed overnight. Her old roommate, Stacy, who once teased her for her frayed clothes and soft heart, suddenly reappeared with forced smiles and wild stories about how she had always believed in Clara. Old co-workers who had barely noticed her at the diner now left voice messages dripping with fake concern. Hey, remember me? Thought we could catch up. Maybe you could? Help me out a little? Clara felt it building. The weight of expectation, the tightening grip of greed, the suffocating noise of a world that wanted her to fit into a mold she didn't recognize. The mayor's warnings echoed in her mind. Some will try to use you, some will worship you, and some will resent you. He hadn't been exaggerating. The worst came one morning, about a week after Ellis's funeral. Clara was sipping coffee at her kitchen table, the same table she'd sat at countless mornings long before the world had known her name, when the headline hit. Anonymous source: Clara Monroe too inexperienced to handle Ellis' fortune. The article was brutal. It questioned her education, her upbringing, her naive understanding of the complexities of global charity work. It hinted, without outright saying, that she would fail, that the foundation's billions would be squandered under her untrained hand. It was, Clara realized, a warning shot, a public attempt to undermine her before she had even begun. And it worked. Comments exploded online. Just another charity case who got lucky. Bet she blows it all in a year. Why should we trust some nobody waitress with that kind of money? For the first time since that fateful day at Miller's Market, Clara doubted herself. Maybe they were right. What did she know about running a foundation? How could she possibly manage billions? Was she really the person William Ellis had believed her to be? She thought back to her conversation with him, his frail hands squeezing hers, his trust shining in his fading eyes. "You saw me," he had said. "Not a billionaire, not a charity case, just a man. You taught me that kindness still lives." Clara closed the laptop, heart hammering. She realized something chilling. If she wasn't careful, the world would turn her act of kindness into a commodity, a brand, a product to sell. And William Ellis's legacy, the pure, quiet hope he had entrusted to her, would be devoured by it. She needed help, real help, not the kind that came with strings and contracts and cameras. She needed people who believed in the mission, not the money. But first, she needed to find her own voice, her own strength. Because if she didn't stand up now, everything would crumble before it even began. That night, Clara stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Same dark hair, same plain face, same tired eyes. And yet, something was different now. Beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, there was steel, not the sharp, brutal steel of ambition, the quiet, enduring steel of purpose. The kind that didn't glitter, the kind that didn't boast, the kind that lasted. She pulled out a notebook and pen, no computer, no consultants, just her, and began writing. A manifesto, a promise, a roadmap, not for fame, not for fortune, but for hope. Real, stubborn, impossible hope. The kind her mother had believed in, the kind William Ellis had fought for, the kind that had made her reach into her wallet in that dusty grocery store without a second thought, the kind that built a better world, one quiet act at a time. When she finished, the first line she had written stood out like a beacon. "We are not here to be famous. We are here to be faithful." The first lesson Clara learned after inheriting William Ellis's legacy was brutally simple. You can't carry a revolution alone. No matter how strong her heart was, no matter how pure her intentions, the world was too heavy for one set of hands. She needed allies. Real ones. Not the kind who smiled for cameras or shuffled papers in boardrooms, but the kind who would bleed beside her if the fight demanded it. She started with her gut. Who had helped her when she had nothing to offer? Who had stood by her before the world cared who she was? Mrs. Alvarez, the retired librarian who had once snuck extra books into Clara's backpack because she knew late fees would be too much. Malik Carter, a scrappy community organizer she'd met years ago when she volunteered at the food pantry. Joanne Eng, a former accountant who had lost her job, speaking out against corruption at her firm. A quiet woman with a mind like a steel trap and a moral compass that never wavered. And a few others. Ordinary people. Invisible to the cameras. Indispensable to Clara. They met for the first time in the back room of a crumbling community center. No marble conference tables, no catered lunches. Just mismatched chairs, lukewarm coffee, and fierce, unpolished hope. Clara stood before them, clutching the notebook she had filled the night the world tried to break her. "I'm not here to make us rich," she said, voice trembling but strong. "I'm here to make things right. For people like us, for people they ignore." She looked around the circle, at the wrinkled hands, the calloused palms, the tired but determined faces. "If you're looking for power or praise," Clara continued, "you're in the wrong room. But if you're looking for a fight that actually matters..." She opened her hands, heart exposed. "Then I need you." One by one, they nodded. No speeches, no slogans, just the quiet, solemn binding of souls who had been broken by the world and were now ready to build something better. together. Over the next few weeks, the plan took shape. First, they would audit every penny of the Ellis Foundation, expose the waste, root out the corruption that had crept into its corners when no one was looking. Second, they would fund the forgotten. Not glamorous causes that looked good on magazine covers, but the unglamorous, grinding work of real change. Mental health clinics in neighborhoods no one cared about. Scholarships for single parents who had given up hope. Microloans for immigrant families locked out of the banking system. Third, they would do it all transparently. No backroom deals, no hidden profits. Every donor, every dollar, every decision open to the public eye. But not everyone wanted that, especially not the ones who had been quietly feeding off the foundation's wealth for years. Lawyers, consultants, fake nonprofits with glittering names and hollow hearts. They saw Clara's rise not as hope but as a threat, and soon the attacks began. One morning, Malik burst into the community center holding a tablet, his face dark with anger. "Clara, you need to see this." He set the screen in front of her. A new article, viral already. The dangerous naivete of Clara Monroe. Is she squandering William Ellis's legacy? The piece was savage. It painted her as reckless, as irresponsible, as an unstable nobody leading billions into ruin. It cited anonymous sources close to the foundation, the very same parasites who had once treated Ellis's fortune like their personal playground. Clara read every line without blinking, every insult, every insinuation, every carefully planted seed of doubt. When she looked up, Malik's fists were clenched so hard his knuckles were white. "You want me to draft a response?" he asked. "We can fight this. Hit them back." Clara shook her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice calm as still water. "Not yet." "Why not?" Joanne asked from across the room, frowning. "You can't let them define you." Clara rose from her chair, walking to the window. Outside, kids were playing in the cracked parking lot, their laughter bright against the crumbling asphalt. "Because fighting on their terms means we already lost," she said quietly. "They want a spectacle. They want me flailing in the mud. I'm not giving them that." She turned back, her eyes blazing. "We're not here to win arguments," she said. "We're here to win lives." The team fell silent, letting the truth settle deep into their bones. It would be harder this way, slower, lonelier, but it would be real. And that, Clara knew, was the only thing worth fighting for. Days turned into weeks. Their movement grew in the shadows, not viral videos, not trending hashtags, but block by block, heart by heart. People who had never been invited to boardrooms, people who had never been handed microphones. Now they had a seat at the table. Because Clara had built the table herself, but success came at a cost. One night, after a long meeting, Clara found a note slipped under her apartment door. No return address, no signature, just 5 words scrawled in blocky, angry letters. "You don't belong here." And taped to the bottom, a burned scrap of a newspaper clipping with her own smiling face, half charred. For the first time in a long while, fear pierced Clara's armor. Not for herself, but for everything they were building. Because the old world, the world that thrived on greed, cruelty, and corruption, wasn't going to let go without a fight. And Clara Monroe, the simple woman who once paid for an old man's groceries without expecting anything in return, now found herself at war with the very soul of the city. It started with a broken lock. Clara returned to the community center one evening, late, after most of the team had gone home, and found the door hanging open on its hinges, the wood splintered around the frame. Her heart stopped. The lights inside were off. The place was silent. "Hello," she called, her voice thin and small against the cavernous dark. No answer. Clara crept inside, phone clutched tightly in her hand, her footsteps echoing across the scuffed linoleum floors. The offices had been ransacked, papers scattered everywhere, filing cabinets pried open, laptops smashed beyond repair. The donation ledger, the record of every dollar spent, every project planned, torn to shreds. It wasn't random. It was a message, a warning, a threat. The police took hours to show up, and when they did, they treated Clara like she was wasting their time. No cameras? No witnesses? Probably just kids messing around, one officer shrugged, already half turning back to his cruiser. "It wasn't kids," Clara said quietly, fists clenched at her sides. "It was a hit." The officer raised an eyebrow like she was crazy, scribbled half-hearted notes, and left. Clara stood in the ruins of the center, feeling the crushing weight of it all settle on her shoulders. They were trying to scare her, trying to bleed her spirit dry without ever lifting a public hand against her. Because cowards never attack the strong directly. They chip away at the edges until you collapse from within. Malik arrived minutes later, breathless, eyes wild with anger. "We'll rebuild," he said immediately, surveying the wreckage. "They can't silence us," Joanne growled from the doorway, her usually calm demeanor cracking with fury. Clara nodded, throat too tight to speak. But deep inside, a terrible seed of doubt took root. If they could destroy their safe places, if they could hurt her team, how long before they came after the people Clara had sworn to protect? The next blow came just 2 days later. A letter. Not from lawyers, not from consultants, from the city government, an official cease and desist order, claiming the Ellis Foundation, under Clara's new leadership, had failed to properly file critical compliance paperwork, threatening to freeze all assets, threatening to seize control, threatening to shut her down completely. It was a coordinated assault. They couldn't kill her kindness. They couldn't smear her character effectively enough. So they were trying to strangle her in bureaucracy, bury her under mountains of paperwork, tie her hands behind her back until she choked on red tape. Clara stared at the letter in the dim light of the community center's back office, the only room still intact. Her team sat around her, silent and tense. "We have to fight this," Malik said, slamming his palm on the table. "Hire better lawyers. Go public. Burn them down before they bury us." "If we go public," Joanne warned, "they'll spin it. Make it look like we're just another scandal. And if we don't," Malik snapped, "we're finished." The room crackled with anger, fear, desperation. All eyes turned to Clara. Waiting, hoping. She took a long breath, her chest tight with unspoken grief. "We don't fight them by becoming them," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The kind that came from standing your ground after every reason to run. "We won't scream. We won't smear. We won't play dirty." She stood, pushing the chair back, her hands steady even if her heart wasn't. "We will fix the paperwork. We will tighten the audits. We will rebuild the center." She looked around the room, at the tired, beautiful faces that had followed her into this impossible war. "And when they come for us again, and they will, we will answer the same way we always have." She placed her hand over her heart. "With the truth, with dignity, with fire they can't understand because it doesn't burn for money or power. It burns for people." Tears glistened in Malik's eyes. Joanne nodded silently. Slowly, one by one, the others stood too. Not because they weren't afraid, but because faith, true, stubborn, unreasonable faith, was stronger than fear. The next days blurred into a frenzy of work. Meetings, repairs, legal filings, no sleep, barely any food, just the endless, grinding battle to hold on to a dream the world was determined to crush. But then, it happened. The betrayal. It was a Thursday afternoon, clouds boiling low in the sky, the taste of rain thick in the air. Clara was sorting donation records when Malik burst into the office, his face stricken. "You need to see this," he said, voice hollow. He tossed a folder onto the desk. Inside, photographs. Joanne meeting privately with one of the foundation's former corrupt consultants. Secret bank transfers, leaked emails undermining Clara's leadership behind her back. Clara sat very still. The betrayal cut deeper than all the headlines, deeper than the lawsuits, deeper than the break-in. Because this was someone she had trusted, someone she had believed in, someone who had stood in that circle and sworn to fight beside her. "She sold us out," Malik said bitterly. "She sold you out." Clara stared at the photos for a long moment, and then, without a word, she closed the folder. "Call a meeting," she said quietly. "Tonight." "What are you going to do?" Malik asked. Her hands shook slightly as she stacked the papers, but her voice was iron. "What I have to," Clara said. "Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about every person counting on us to be better than the world we're trying to change." That night, under the flickering lights of the battered community center, Clara Monroe would face her greatest test yet. Not against outsiders, but against betrayal inside her own walls. And how she chose to respond would determine whether their movement, their fragile, impossible dream, would survive or fall apart forever. The community center smelled of rain and dust. A summer storm had broken outside, drumming against the leaking roof, rattling the cracked windows. Inside, the atmosphere was even heavier. Clara stood at the front of the main hall, a battered clipboard in her hand, facing her gathered team. Faces tense. Eyes shadowed with betrayal and fear. At the back, by the flickering exit sign, Joanne stood stiffly, arms crossed, chin raised in quiet defiance, the traitor in their midst. "Thank you all for coming," Clara began, her voice low but firm. No one spoke. No one moved. The air was thick with unspoken anger, with heartbreak. Clara took a breath, steadied herself. "You all know why we're here," she said. "There's no point pretending otherwise." She turned to Joanne. "You met with people who tried to destroy this foundation," she said plainly. "You funneled information. You undermined our work. You put all of us." Her voice broke for just a moment. "You put the people we promised to help in danger." Joanne's mouth tightened into a thin line. "I did what I had to do," she said coldly. "You're too naive, Clara, too sentimental. You think the world runs on kindness and fairy tales? You think you can save anyone playing by the rules?" Clara stared at her, at the woman she had trusted, laughed with, fought alongside. "I thought we were building something different," she said softly. Joanne laughed, a brittle, joyless sound. "Different?" she spat. "You think you can change a system this rotten without getting your hands dirty? You think Ellis built all this playing nice?" Her voice rose, bitter and scathing. "You're a child, a symbol, a headline, and when you fail, and you will, the world will forget you, just like it forgets everyone else who tries to be better." The words hit hard. They echoed the doubts that had gnawed at Clara in the darkest hours. That she was foolish, that she was weak, that she was destined to fail. But standing there amid the peeling paint and sagging chairs, Clara realized something. Joanne wasn't wrong about the world. It was brutal. It was cruel. It didn't reward goodness. But that didn't make it right. And it didn't mean they had to become what they hated just to survive. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "Maybe I am naive," she said. "Maybe kindness doesn't win awards. Maybe it doesn't topple governments or shatter systems overnight." She looked around the room, at Malik, at Mrs. Alvarez, at the dozens of quiet heroes who had risked everything to stand with her. "But it's the only thing that's ever truly changed anything that mattered. And I'd rather lose everything fighting for what's right than win by becoming exactly what we're trying to defeat." Silence. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the floor. Slowly, Malik stood, crossing the room to stand beside Clara. "Me too," he said. Then Mrs. Alvarez. Then a young woman named Dana, who had once been homeless but now managed the literacy program. Then Raphael, who fixed broken chairs in the center on weekends with arthritic hands. One by one, they stepped forward. Not because Clara promised them success, not because she offered them power, but because they saw in her something rare, something the world had almost forgotten. A leader who refused to sell her soul, no matter the price. Joanne's eyes flashed with anger, and maybe, beneath it, something like regret. "You'll fail," she whispered. Clara shook her head. "Not today," she said. She could have demanded Joanne leave, could have publicly shamed her, could have fed her to the wolves the way the world always fed on weakness. Instead, Clara simply stepped aside. "You're free to go," she said. "We won't fight you. We won't become you." Joanne hesitated. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her expression. Guilt? Sadness? Clara would never know. Then she turned and walked out into the storm, without looking back. The doors slammed shut behind her. And in that instant, Clara understood something powerful. Victory wasn't always loud. It wasn't always about crushing your enemies. Sometimes it was simply refusing to let them change who you were. The rain hammered down harder. The center leaked. The walls trembled. But inside those crumbling walls, something stronger than bricks and steel was being built. A community. A movement. A revolution of the heart. And it would outlast the storm. That night, as they swept up shattered glass and refiled scattered papers, Malik pulled Clara aside. "You know this isn't the last time they'll come for you," he said. Clara smiled wearily. "I know," she said, "but I'm ready." "How?" he asked, half in awe. Clara looked out the cracked window at the lightning-laced sky. "Because they think the fight is about money, or headlines, or control," she said. "But the real fight..." She placed a hand over her heart. "The real fight is about who we become when the world tries to break us." And Clara Monroe, the simple woman who once emptied her wallet for an old man who needed groceries, was no longer breakable. She had become something far more dangerous, unstoppable hope. The invitation arrived in an unmarked envelope, simple, no fanfare, no gold lettering. Just 5 words, typed neatly across a plain white card. Inauguration ceremony, the future begins. At first, Clara thought it was a mistake. There was no sender name, no indication who had arranged it, but something deep in her bones told her to go. Something that whispered, "This is the moment you've been fighting for." The venue wasn't what she expected. No grand concert hall, no glittering ballroom. Instead, it was the crumbling shell of an abandoned train station at the edge of Hawthorne City, a place that had once ferried thousands of dreamers toward brighter futures, before time and neglect shut it down. Clara stepped inside, her footsteps echoing against the worn stone floors, and gasped. Hundreds of people filled the vast broken space. Not politicians, not billionaires, ordinary people. Nurses still in scrubs, teachers still clutching battered briefcases. Mothers rocking babies, men with calloused hands from construction sites and repair shops. The forgotten, the invisible, the people Clara had been fighting for all along. And at the center of them all, a wooden podium, handcrafted and simple, draped with a banner that read, "The Clara Monroe Foundation, building tomorrow with kindness." A quiet murmur ran through the crowd as she entered. Not applause, not cheers. Something deeper. Respect, recognition, love. The kind of love that can't be bought or faked. The kind of love that grows only when someone dares to fight for those no one else sees. Malik met her at the entrance, his eyes shining. "You didn't think we were going to let them define your story, did you?" he said with a crooked grin. Behind him, Mrs. Alvarez beamed, holding a clipboard filled with new literacy program sign-ups. Dana waved excitedly, clutching a list of scholarship recipients. Raphael wheeled in a cart stacked with donated books, tools, food. The work had already begun, with or without the cameras, with or without permission. Because Clara's revolution had never needed headlines, it had always lived in the hearts of those who still believed. A microphone crackled, the murmurs quieted, and Clara found herself gently ushered to the podium. She looked out over the sea of faces, all colors, all ages, all stories stitched together by one stubborn thread. Hope. Her throat tightened. The speech she had written, careful, polished, approved by PR consultants, crumpled in her hand. She didn't need it. Not here. Not now. Clara gripped the podium, leaning forward slightly, speaking not from her notes but from her soul. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she began, her voice steady despite the tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't handed opportunity. I wasn't taught how to win in boardrooms or fight in courtrooms." She paused, scanning the crowd. "All I knew was that kindness mattered, even when no one was looking, especially then." A ripple of nods through the audience. "They said I was too naive to lead, too inexperienced to change anything, too simple to matter." Clara smiled, small but unbreakable. "They were right about one thing. I am simple. I simply refuse to give up on people." The crowd stirred, energy crackling through the room like a live wire. "And today, with all of you, we begin something they can't touch, something they can't tear down with lawsuits or lies or fear." Her voice rose now, powerful and clear. A movement built on dignity, not division, on service, not self-interest, on love, real, stubborn, impossible love, for a world that forgot how badly it needs it. Tears slid down faces in the crowd, hands found each other, clasping tightly. "We are not here to be famous," Clara said, echoing the first line of her manifesto, her voice breaking slightly. "We are here to be faithful." The room exploded, not with roaring applause, but with the overwhelming, holy sound of hundreds of voices whispering together. Faithful. Afterward, Clara wandered through the crowd, laughing and crying with people she had never met but somehow already loved. An elderly woman pressed a knitted scarf into Clara's hands. A little boy gave her a drawing of a house surrounded by smiling stick figures labeled Hope. And then, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, a familiar figure stepped forward. He was young, maybe 17, with ragged sneakers, a jacket patched in a dozen places, and in his arms he cradled a small battered grocery bag. Clara's heart seized. The boy approached shyly, his eyes huge and solemn. "You don't know me," he said quietly, "but you helped my grandfather once." Clara blinked, stunned. "Your grandfather?" The boy nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "William Ellis. He told me about you, about the store, about how you didn't look at him like he was nobody. He dug into the grocery bag and pulled out a small object wrapped carefully in brown paper. Before he died, he told me to find you, the boy said. Said you'd know what to do with this. Hands trembling, Clara unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a worn, faded notebook. The front cover was cracked, the pages lined with tiny, careful handwriting. It was William Ellis's personal journal. Clara flipped it open to the first page. A single line was scrawled there. One act of kindness can outlive 1,000 kings. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the notebook against her chest, feeling the weight of it, not heavy with burden, but with purpose. The boy smiled shyly. He believed in you, he said, and so do I. Clara knelt down and hugged him fiercely, the way you hug someone when you know the whole future depends on it. Because it did. Because it always had. That night, under the broken rafters of a forgotten station with a storm still raging beyond the walls, Clara Monroe, the simple woman who once paid for an old man's groceries without expecting anything in return, became something larger than she had ever dared imagine. Not a symbol. Not a martyr. Not a brand. A torchbearer. Carrying forward a fire kindled by a lifetime of quiet courage. Lighting the way for those still stumbling in the dark. And somewhere far beyond the storm, under a higher and kinder sky, William Ellis smiled. Because hope, once given, never truly dies. It simply finds a new hand to carry it. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness plants a seed that grows into a revolution. Clara Monroe didn't set out to change the world. She simply refused to let it stay broken. In a world that rewards greed and punishes compassion, she proved something timeless. Hope can be quiet, hope can be small, but once it's lit, it's unstoppable. Carry the torch, because you never know who you might save, including yourself.